You could turn those lights on. Okay, so I'll begin with the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, today we will be doing the Cula-gosinga Sutta, because that was announced by Bodhi in the email. It was the Cula-gosinga Sutta.
Sutta 31 and 32.
Excuse me?
31 and 32.
Right, okay. Because I realized I had Sutta number 30 originally on the list, but then I think I took that off last week so that we could catch up. Okay, so this is a sutta which doesn't have a very deep philosophical content, but rather it's important because it shows the kind of harmony that should exist, firstly within the Sangha as the monastic order, but also it serves as a kind of what I would call a model for harmony in human affairs in general. Though it's very seldom that one finds such a high degree of harmony, even when you have a small group of monastics together, there's almost bound to be some reason for quarrels and disputes to break out. Is that so? Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha was living in a place called Natika, in a dwelling called the Brick House. And on that occasion there were 3 monks. The most prominent of them is named Venerable Anuruddha, and his 2 companions are Venerable Nandiya and Venerable Kindiya. Okay, so they were all living together in a place called the forest or woods of the Gosinga sal trees. The sal tree, it's a very beautiful tree that grows in northern India. It has a very sweet scent, very beautiful flower. And so when all the trees are blossoming, then the forest becomes pervaded by this almost divine scent. You know, these 3 monks, the only one who appears elsewhere in the Nikayas with a prominent role is Venerable Anuruddha. Venerable Anuruddha was a cousin of the Buddha. He was a member of the Sakyan clan, and like other Sakyans, he grew up in a great deal of luxury. And after the Buddha had left the home life and then become enlightened, and when he came back to visit his relatives in the city of Kapilavatthu, his birthplace, the place where he grew up, a great number of the Sakyans went forth and became monks under the Buddha, because the Buddha had become a very prestigious spiritual teacher, and so all of the families thought that it was almost obligatory for one of their sons to go forth and become a monk. Then Anuruddha had an older brother whose name was Mahanama. And so the two of them discussed together which one should become a monk. And Anuruddha was originally hesitant to become a monk. So he said to Mahanama, why don't you become a monk and I'll stay and live the home life, live the household life. So Mahanama said, well, okay, if that's what you want, we'll do it that way. But let me explain to you a little bit about your responsibilities if you remain in the household life. Our family owns a great number of fields. So when the spring comes, you have to see that the fields are all plowed. And you have to do, every day you have to check the fields, make sure that they're plowed properly. Then as the crops are growing, you have to make sure that they're watered every day. You have to make sure that every day that they get sufficient fertilizer. Then when the crops start to grow, when they're full grown, then you have to supervise the harvesting of the crops. You have to make sure that they're all collected, bundled, brought into the storeroom. Then you have to oversee the threshing of the crops. You have to oversee the discarding of the waste. Then you have to see that the crops, some are sold on the market, others are distributed to the families. Then, by that time, it's almost time for the next plowing season. So you have to start to see that, again, that the fields are properly plowed, that the seed is sown, that the crops grow properly, etc., etc., etc. Then Anuruddha asked, somewhat in a mood of exasperation, doesn't this ever come to an end? Then Mahanama said, no, it doesn't come to an end. It goes on this way year after year after year. Then Anuruddha said, okay, you stay and look after the crops. I'll become a monk. Okay, so then Anuruddha went forth and became a monk under the Buddha, and he had a special skill which he developed very early, and that is that he immediately was able to enter into deep states of meditation, and after attaining these states of deep meditation, the jhanas, then he was able to open up what is called the Dipa Chakku, the divine eye. And so with the divine eye, he was able to see other world systems, other realms of existence. He was able to see distant galaxies. Do you know the Hubble telescope? What would it be like to have, you don't really have to rely on a telescope, but you just go into kind of deep meditation, and then you just open up the Hubble telescope within your own inner vision, and then you can see distant galaxies, and you move your vision out to those distant galaxies, then you see beyond them other galaxies, and you move further out to those galaxies. Then you see what looks like stars in the distance, and you move further out to those stars, but they turn out to be galaxies in turn. So this was the kind of vision that Anuruddha had. But even though he had this divine vision, he had to struggle very hard to achieve arhatship. There's a sutta it comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Threes, where Anuruddha complains to Venerable Sariputta. He says that I have this divine eye by which I can see thousands of world systems, and yet I'm not able to reach the extinction of the defilements. Oh, he says, yeah, I have this divine eye by which I can see distant world systems. I'm very energetic, very mindful, and yet I'm unable to reach the extinction of defilements. Then Sariputta tells him that you have this attachment to the divine eye. That is a hindrance to you. because you're so skilled in meditation. What's making that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you're so skilled in meditation, that's bringing a subtle mana, a subtle conceit in you, and the fact that you haven't reached the extinction of the defilements, that's causing a subtle excitement or a subtle worrying in you, or restlessness. So you should get rid of your attachment to the divine I. You should get rid of your pride because of your skill in meditation. And you should stop worrying that you haven't reached the extinction of defilements, but just continue to practice in a very straight way. And so Anuruddha then followed the advice of Sariputta, and then before long he was able to reach the extinction of the defilements. But even during that period when he was practicing, several times he had to be helped by the Buddha. We have in the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a sutta that comes towards the end, I think it's 127, 128. It's 120. It's 128, where the Buddha goes to visit Anuruddha and his friends when they're meditating in solitude, and then they report to the Buddha that they're having certain exceptional experiences in meditation, but they don't know how to overcome them and to develop wisdom or insight. Then the Buddha gives them advice. And then there's another sutta that comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of Eights, where Anuruddha, again, he was meditating in solitude, and then 7 thoughts occurred to him, which are called thoughts of a great man, a great person. That this Dharma is for one with few wishes, not for one with many desires. This Dharma is for one who is content, not for one who is discontent. The Dharma is for one who is energetic, not for one who lacks energy. The Dharma is for one who is fond of solitude, not for one who is fond of company. The Dharma is for one who is energetic, not for one who lacks energy. The Dharma is for one who is mindful, not for one who lacks mindfulness. For one who has samadhi, concentration, not for one who lacks concentration. And for one who has wisdom, not for one who lacks wisdom. So those were 7 thoughts of a great person that Anuruddha had. Then the Buddha came to Anuruddha, I think by supernormal power, and told him that he should remember the 8th thought of a great person. And that is that this Dhamma is for one who delights in the absence of mental proliferation, the absence of conceptual fabrication, not for one who delights in conceptual proliferation or conceptual constructions. And so these then became the 8 thoughts of the great person. Okay, so this sutta that we're going to read today takes place when Anuruddha and his 2 friends had already achieved arhatship. But as we'll see as we go along, none of them has reported to the other about their attainment of arhatship. Okay, so now the sutta tells us that one day in the evening, the Buddha rose from his meditation. He was living in the monastery together with, or in this dwelling place together with a large number of monks. And the commentary says that the Buddha simply got up very early, put away all of his belongings, took his extra robe and his alms bowl, and left the dwelling place without reporting to anybody. He didn't tell Sariputta, didn't tell Ananda, but he just took off by himself. Why does the Buddha do this? Because sometimes he just likes to wander alone and to go anonymously, not surrounded by a crowd. You know, being a Buddha, it's really like a terrible burden. You know, everybody thinks, I want to be a Buddha. I want to be a Buddha so I could be like the... like every American kid wants to be president when he grows up. Thinks, I want to be president, I want to be president. And so that's the glory, like every mother tells the kid, you're in America, anybody can be president. So we have a talented young kid who he's very successful in school, goes on to college, the best college, goes on to Harvard Law School, gets his law degree, starts working his way up through the political ladder, thinking, I've got to be president, I've got to be president. He's popular, he wins the affection of many people, so when the convention comes, they nominate him for the candidate. He runs for well, first in the primary, he wins, he gets the primary selection, then he goes into the election, the presidential election, thinking, I've got to run, I've got to run. You know, during the campaign, you have to work like about 21 hours a day, maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep per night. Very restless sleep also, thinking what you have to do the next day. Until finally the election in November comes around, you win the presidency, then you get to be president, there's a great celebration, all of your followers are popping champagne corks, celebrating for about 2 months, November, December, January, you're celebrating, very happy, making preparations to move into the White House. Then you get into the White House, you have that first night, the great inauguration, balls and dancing and celebration and all the movie actors, movie actresses, prominent sports stars, musicians, personalities all come to your balls and everybody is so happy celebrating. But then the next day you step into the White House, you're eager, enthusiastic, but then there come the attacks, the criticisms, the obstinacy, the crises break out here, there. Oh, there's a problem with Iran, problem with Israel and Palestine, and problems with, could be Katrina or Gulf oil spills or this policy, that problem. And you want to do this another day. But you know, one always is attached to one's name and history, so then 4 years of that, you think you would just want to resign and go live in a monastery. But then you have to think, now the next presidential election is coming, I have to run for re-election. And one goes through this turmoil all again. Till then, if you win the re-election and you go through another 4 years of that, then after 8 years you resign and it seems all like a bad dream has passed. So being like a Buddha, it's, you know, it's a little bit like being like the American president, except that it comes not so much through personal ambition, but through great vows and great aspirations. But still you think, when I'm a Buddha, then I will be, you know, at the center of the spiritual universe. Everybody will be making offerings to me. I'll have so many hundreds of monastic disciples, maybe thousands of monastic disciples, hundreds and thousands of lay disciples. Devas will be coming to me. Brahmas will be coming to me. The kings of all of the states of India will be venerating me. But then when you get to be a Buddha, you think, wow, I just want a little peace and quiet. Yeah, so every once in a while the Buddha thinks to himself, I'm tired of being surrounded by monks and nuns, lay followers, lay male followers, lay female followers, kings and princes and ordinary people and getting in these arguments with followers of the other sects, having to settle conflicts within the Sangha. Let me just go off and live in solitude. Like there's a well-known sutta, or an incident that's reported in the Vinaya, where there was a big conflict taking place in the city of Kosambi, which divided the Sangha very bitterly. And the Buddha tried to reconcile the two factions, but they just said to the Buddha, "You stay out of it. This is our business. We could settle this ourselves." And then the Buddha, he thought of the elephant, sometimes the king of the elephant herd, chief elephant, is always surrounded by other male elephants which are struggling, competing with him, trying to drive him out of the position of being the king of the herd. Female elephants who are always trying to win his affection. Baby elephants that are always sort of misbehaving in his presence. And sometimes that bull elephant thinks, "Let me just abandon the herd and go off by myself." And so the Buddha thought of the king elephant in this way, and then thought, "Let me also go off and stay by myself." And so the Buddha left the monastery, left the quarreling monks to themselves, and went off to stay in a place called the Parilayaka forest. And while he was staying there were nobody to serve him, nobody to attend on him, except an elephant came to serve him, and a monkey. Okay, so at this time too, the Buddha would have been a bit wary of living together with the whole Sangha, and so he just wanted to go off on his own. And if he were to report to the others, then they would say, "Oh, let us go with you. Oh, you can't go off by yourself." And then he wouldn't have had the solitude that he wanted. This reminds me of the time during my first years as a monk in Sri Lanka. I was living in this little temple. It's in the countryside, a little distance away from the village. And so I thought I wanted to go for a walk just to see what the village was like, to go past the village out into the countryside. I didn't quite know the conventions with the way that lay people interact with the monks or what they expect from the monks. And so as I go walking through the countryside, I'm passing, I get out of the village, coming into the countryside, and people see me walking, and then they say, "Handune," that means venerable one, "Enda, teegak, you bonda, teegak, bonda. Bante, please come to our house and drink a little tea." So you feel like you have to oblige them. So you go to the house, they serve you some tea, then they say, "Handune, enda, wadinda, api pansalahandru, hampavendra." Bante, please come and meet the chief monk of our temple. And so to make them happy, you have to say, "Handai, hari, kai, kai." So you go to the temple, and you come to the temple, and the chief monk says, "Teekak? Teekak on? Would you like to drink a little tea?" And of course, to be polite, you have to say, "Yes." So you drink a little tea and chat a little, chit-chat with the chief monk till finally you take your leave and you depart. Walk a little further, somebody else comes out from the house and says, "Handru, koheda wadinne. Bante, where are you going?" "Mama has to take a walk." Avidinda tikako. I want to take a little walk. Oh, hantu. Api gevra et vadinda teyakako. Venerable, please come to our house and drink a little tea. So it becomes very difficult to get away. Okay, so here the Buddha, fortunately, he's not walking apparently through woodland, so he's not going to be held back by people inviting him to come to their house to drink some tea. So finally he comes to this park of the Gosinga solitary wood. And then there's a park keeper here. It seems to be like a preserve, a reserve. And they assigned this park keeper in order to protect the park so that people from the village don't come to cut down the trees and take the wood to their house to use for firewood. Okay, so when he comes, then the park keeper sees the Buddha coming and he addresses him as recluse, ascetic. Do not enter the park. There are 3 young men here who are seeking their own good. In other words, these are like 3 ascetics living in the forest who are meditating to reach some kind of higher realization. And so he says, do not disturb them. Okay, but Anuruddha must have been tuned in to we call this the mind-controlled internet, mind-controlled television. And so he was able, with his divine eye and divine ear, to see what was taking place outside the forest, to hear this conversation. And so he would have come to the edge of the forest, and he told the park keeper, please do not prevent the teacher from coming in. This is our teacher, the Buddha. Okay, and so then Anuruddha goes to the other monks, reports to them, and then they all come out to meet the Buddha and sort of welcome him and lead him into the forest. Okay, then they bring him to their dwelling place, they show him the usual courtesies that are due to a teacher. They bow down to him, they provide him with water, they wash his feet, and then they exchange the courteous greetings. And then the Buddha says to them, I hope you're not meeting any trouble in getting alms food. That's the ordinary way in which wandering monks would greet one another. Anuruddha says, we're keeping well, we're not having any trouble getting alms food. Okay, then the Buddha brings up the important topic of this conversation. He says, I hope that you are all living in concord, in harmony, with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes and with friendly eyes. And we often meet this description in the text where it's sometimes contrasted with another description. That is the description of monks who are arguing and fighting. I think we'll see this in Sutta number 128. Yeah, on page 1008, the very first paragraph, where it says, on that occasion, the monks at Kosambi had taken to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. Like their tongues become knives or swords. And so when they speak to one another, they're insulting each other, abusing each other, reviling each other, speaking harshly to one another. But in contrast, we have the monks who are blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly, friendly eyes. Okay, so Anuruddha replies that they're able to live together in this kind of harmony. And then the Buddha asks, how are you able to do so? Okay, then Anuruddha explains. He says, what I do, Bhante, is that I think it is a gain for me, a great gain for me, that I am living with such companions in the holy life, with such fellow monastics. Then he mentions 3 ways in which they live together in harmony. He says, I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards those venerable ones, both openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. And I maintain mental acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. Okay, the key word here is the well-known word metta. Usually when we think of metta, or we hear about metta in Buddhism, we immediately think that it means doing a particular type of meditation. Like, what kind of meditation do you practice? What is your practice? Oh, my practice is loving kindness meditation, metta bhavana. But the person might not pay much attention to how they act and interact with others. But the Buddha speaks about 3 ways of developing metta, 3 ways of practicing metta. The 3 ways of practicing metta are metta kaya kamma, that's bodily action, which is, can you read it?
The nice reflective.
Oh, let me turn it to a different angle. Is this better?
Yeah.
Is it better for everybody? Yeah, and make sure. Okay. After you get the camera on this, then don't leave it on that, because then the reflection comes. So, those people who are viewing on the internet have trouble seeing. Okay, so there's metta kaya kamma. That means loving kindness through bodily action. And metta vachi kamma, loving kindness expressed in speech. And metta mano kamma, loving kindness in thoughts. And then each one is to be practiced in both ways. He says, towards them both openly and privately. So, for example, one can practice loving kindness by bodily action openly by, say, if one of the other monks gets sick, then his companion might bring him some hot water, bring him some medicines, might call a doctor to come to see him. If he's carrying some heavy load that he can't manage all by himself, he might help him to carry the load. So this is doing good, kind deeds towards him openly. And he could do also good deeds towards him secretly. For example, if maybe somebody could think of it, how would you practice loving kindness towards somebody privately or secretly so that it's not done openly?
You do things like arranging their chair before they arrived, and like arranging their things and supplying food and so on.
And
like putting sweet things in the fridge for them, things like that, giving them food. Infinite number of ways.
Any other ideas?
When you say prayers,
Excuse me?
say prayers.
This is bodily action.
Oh, that's it.
Shovel the walk for them, if it's snowing or something.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. Okay. Like sometimes,
Or carry somebody's, my next door neighbor's an elderly lady, so like I'll put in her garbage thing sometimes.
yeah, those are some good examples. And so in Buddhism we attach like a special significance to doing good deeds for others almost secretly without seeking any kind of recognition, acknowledgement for what we do. Okay, then there's maintaining loving acts of speech towards others, both openly and privately. Openly, of course, means you speak to them gently, in friendly ways, with soft voice, inquiring after their well-being. And how does one speak loving words to them privately or secretly?
You can praise them to others.
Right, okay, that's a good example. So you speak highly of them to others. Any other ways this might be done? Any ideas?
Or you could take the blame for something that they did. It's a bit extreme, but I actually saw that done once. I made a mistake
Yeah.
or dropped something in company with someone else, and later when they were explaining what had happened, they said, we
Yeah.
dropped the thing. When it was just me, it had just been me, but they said, we dropped the thing. And I thought, when they
That's
said
a
that,
good,
it was
very
hard to
good and unusual example. Any other ideas?
Can you do it negatively by refraining when you really want to go after them? Or I don't know.
That would be more a kind of restraint,
Okay.
but this seems to be a positive action. Yeah. Anyway, I can't think of any myself.
Well, you can advocate, speaking as a mother, sometimes you can explain
Yeah.
what someone did, the way, make it more understandable or
Oh, that's a good
Less.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
advocate.
Or if somebody is, say, impinging on the rights or the well-being of one of your friends or contacts, or even just an acquaintance, and you regard this as being unfair or unjust, then you can speak up in defense of that person.
Mhm.
It's not the same as praising them, but you are
Right.
advocating for their rights, for their welfare.
Or at least mitigating the harm.
Yeah, yeah. So that's an expression of loving kindness in speech. Did you have some idea?
I don't know if this is considered privately, but say if either a political leader or a leader of a movement give an idea through speech that will better the welfare of people in general. And people in general don't really know that they're benefiting from this speech.
Okay, this could be an example of a leader who speaks up on behalf of a great number of people.
Not on behalf of them, but say they speak of issues about climate warming,
Yeah,
global warming.
yeah.
It's not on any specific person, but
Yeah.
people will benefit from this philosophy greatly.
Yeah, this is, I understand what you mean. Like say people who are distant from our place of residence, people in India, Africa, who would be greatly harmed by increased global warming. So if we advocate policies that will control global warming on their behalf, we say that this is an act of loving kindness, of speech.
Or a teacher like you teaching the merit of loving kindness, and then we in turn do things.
Yeah.
So you're not specifically saying something, people don't really know that they're benefiting from your speech to us, teaching.
Okay, maybe one example just occurred to me just now. When you said that, maybe it's just exemplifies what you said, but it refers to a specific person. You know, it's a terrible thing that there's a woman in Iran, who's accused of adultery,
They want to stone.
and they want to bury her in sand with only the head emerging from the sand, and then they want to stone her to death. Now this organization, Abbas, has circulated a petition, spreading over the internet for people to sign, protesting against that, and then eventually they want to collect 100,000 signatures and then submit it to the authorities in Iran.
I think I read that they're not going to stone her.
They still want to kill her.
They still want to kill her.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah,
stone her.
yeah. But there are some 15 other people who are sort of on the lineup to be stoned to death. I think that they haven't yet been convicted, but if they are convicted, then they will be subject to stoning to death. So the petition also covers them. Okay, so this is loving kindness, both openly and privately, in speech. And then there's mental acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. Okay, here the problem is just the opposite. Mental acts of loving kindness towards others openly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a feel, maybe people can feel it if you just adopt a loving mind.
You can change your intention, in your work.
Yeah.
I know in my work as an editor, I try to shift towards doing good,
Yeah.
selecting articles, and that would help somehow.
Yeah.
So would that be a mental act to that one's intention turns towards metta?
But is that openly? I'm not sure.
Because it manifests. The
Yeah.
manifestation would be.
Yeah, actually, it seems that there's sort of like complex intersections of bodily, verbal, and mental. So it begins with the mental, but then if you select an article, you pass it on to a copy editor or something, or to the people who work on the magazine. That might be called verbal. But probably we would say it's basically a mental act. Getting angry at those kids. Shut up.
Well, there could be a refusal to speak against. You could publicly refuse to condemn or
Yeah, but I think that
be restrained.
refusal to speak could be considered, even though one is not speaking, but it's a verbal act because it's a restraint over speech. I don't know, what I would think is that the mental act openly means that you radiate or generate loving kindness towards them when you're in their presence. Whereas when you do it privately, when you might be in your room and then you just think of them with loving kindness, particularly if one generates the loving kindness towards them as a meditative practice. Okay, so these three principles belong to a set of 6 principles that the Buddha teaches time and again in the suttas. They're called sometimes the 6 principles of cordiality and harmony and respect. I think you have them in Chinese. Liu He, is that what they call it? Okay. Excuse me?
That's a poster on the wall.
Yeah.
Right there.
That's right, yeah. Okay, so in the order in which they come in Pali, it's the loving kindness of bodily action, verbal action, mental action, then harmony through observing the same precepts, or observing precepts together, harmony through sharing one's gains. This is especially the case for monastics. Whenever one gets any kind of gains, even things on alms round, like the content of a bowl, the alms bowl, then one should share it with the other monks. And then there's the harmony in views, having a common understanding. In the case of Buddhism, based on the 4 Noble Truths, the 3 characteristics. Okay, but here only 3 of these are mentioned. Then Anuruddha goes on to explain more concretely how they're able to live in harmony. This is expressed very beautifully. He says that, when they're mixing together, he says, he thinks, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? And he says, then I set aside what I want to do and I do what they want to do. In this way, even though we are different in body, but we become one in mind. This isn't intended as a kind of metaphysical proposition that we all have one mind and only the bodies are different. But it's more, you might call this a common sense proposition that we all agree to agree on what we're going to do. Instead of putting forward our own purposes, our own intentions, I find out what the others want to do, and then we reach a kind of consensus. And so each one submits to the will of the others. And since they're all people of wisdom, loving kindness, who seek the good of the group, you don't have to be aware that one is going to be exploiting the others and trying to use the others to fulfill his own private ends. The basic sort of underlying principle of American democracy, modern democracy, is that society consists of different factions, people with different interests. Each person is pursuing his own self-interest, and each group is pursuing its self-interest. Sort of the theory is that when everyone pursuing their own self-interest gets together to form a society, a state, somehow there's like this magic, what they call it, the invisible hand. This is behind the market or behind the state.
Invisible hand of the marketplace?
Yeah, the invisible hand of the market. But also it's supposed to be like the invisible hand in the democracy that ensures that each person pursuing their own self-interest or the interest of their group, somehow all of these interests will balance each other out, and so everybody will gain from it. But does it work in reality? It depends on how much money one has and the power of the particular organization to which one belongs, the power and wealth. But here, this shows, I think, the true way in which the interests of all is served, is that is when each one seeks not his own self-interest, but the interest of the group. And this way they can truly harmonize and truly promote the well-being and harmony of the group. Okay, so then That's how Anuruddha explains their ability to live together in harmony. Okay, then the Buddha asks, I hope that you all abide diligent, ardent, and resolute. I have to say, it seems to me that something was a bit misplaced in the way the sutta has been transmitted, because this expression, dwelling diligent, ardent, and resolute, usually refers to the dedication to meditation practice. And yet the way Anuruddha is going to answer this in the first place, it doesn't relate to meditation practice, but it's more an expression of their group harmony in the way they conduct their everyday affairs. So this seems to illustrate better the way they live together through bodily acts, verbal acts, and even mental acts of loving kindness, rather than dwelling ardent, diligent, and resolute, which will come later. So, anyway, in reply to that question, Anuruddha replies that this is the way they live, diligent, ardent, and resolute. Then he explains their routine on the alms round. He says, whichever of us returns first from the village with alms food, prepares the seats, sets out water for drinking and for washing, and puts the refuse bucket in its place. So apparently they go out separately on alms round, which might be the old style in which it was done. Nowadays, usually when monks living in a monastery, even it could be a large monastery with 100 monks, when they go out on alms round, they'll usually go in large groups in a single file line. But here, since they're